It's a may, not a shall, at least right now. The proposed legislation changes that language and takes away that discretion from the sheriff. And that's the beauty of being a sheriff, is that you're able to exercise that discretion and allocate your resources where you see appropriate. And we're not the arm of public health. We're here to serve the community and keep them safe from crime, from harm, and not from these personal health choices that are being imposed on people. So the discretion is important. Mandates aren't laws. There's a deliberative process, and mandates are issued by one person with a very myopic view of what they're addressing, and it doesn't look at the overbroad issues that it creates with health conditions that can't be treated, like cancer, needed surgeries, things like that. I think we may have compromised a lot more people's health by doing so, by being very narrow-sighted on how we approach this.
Ms. Rennie?
Can you repeat that question,
Yes, ma'am.
please?
Veterans have fought for freedom since the foundation of this country. It is the most important thing to them, their families, and their communities. The last 2 years have shown how fast freedoms can be stripped away. There are a number of legislative bills pending in California. AB 1993 requires employers mandate COVID injection and boosters for employment. SB 1464 requires law enforcement to enforce public health guidelines. Please state your position on these bills and how you would handle them as Sheriff of Inyo County.
So the beautiful thing about our country is our freedom. And over the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of civil unrest and we've seen a lot of upheaval surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. I absolutely disagree with the fact that anybody should be forced vaccinated. It's a personal choice. I, for one, am vaccinated for my own personal reasons, but say Mr. Vetter here is not, that's his choice. There's been a lot of negative stigma around it. And also, initially when the COVID-19 pandemic arose, a lot of the sheriff's departments throughout the country took a hard stance. They were not going to enforce public health mandates, which it kind of was premature in my opinion, because law enforcement was never tasked with actually enforcing these mandates. We were actually tasked with educating the public on the mandates by setting example with masking. I know it's all a personal belief, and I think a lot of us abide by those rules. But since then, it's kind of become a mute issue in my opinion. Everything's been kind of lifted. Again, I absolutely don't believe in any forced mandates at this point. We have these freedoms because the veterans fought for those freedoms. And I appreciate that, and I think we should continue on doing what we're doing. As the Sheriff of Inyo County, my job would be to just educate the public, educate the employees, and not force anything upon anybody for anything.
Thank you. This next question will start with Mr. Johnston. However, the second part of this question, when I read it to you, Mr. Pritchard, part of it is directed strictly to you. You'll understand why.
Okay.
We're not singling nobody out. So, Mr. Johnson, leadership is extremely important in all aspects, but especially in a dynamic environment such as military or paramilitary organization. Who would you appoint as...
You really want an answer? Do I really have to give a name? As far as an undersheriff, I've not really decided yet. I have a few people in mind. We really don't have a lot of in the rank structure above sergeant that I'm aware of, other than one or two. As far as, like I said, as picking an undersheriff, I have thought of it, and we'll see what happens after June 7th. And if I decide to, if I'm still in the race, then we'll have an undersheriff that I'll probably bring out. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you. Had you talk 30 minutes on that.
Mr. Pritchard.
Sorry about that.
Leadership is extremely important in all aspects, but especially in a dynamic environment such as military or paramilitary organization. Who would you appoint as undersheriff and why? You've been acting sheriff for nearly 4 months. Have you appointed an undersheriff? If not, why? When will you, and who will they be?
Why?
I'm shocked that I got this question.
I'm shocked that I have to ask it.
Well, when I was the acting sheriff, I was actually occupying the space of undersheriff acting as sheriff. When we had the application process and I was appointed to the elected office of sheriff, I vacated my undersheriff's position. So up until January 19th, I couldn't actually fill that spot because I was still occupying it. Technical explanation. Before I go into who I would choose for my undersheriff, I would say that I'm not filling it right now because what I hear from my troops is that they need people out on the streets. So what I tell them is, do you want me to fill the halls of my administration or put butts in the seats of patrol cars? So I've chosen the latter. So I am waiting on that decision. It's obviously a critical one. I served as the undersheriff for 3 years, and it's a very important position when serving under the sheriff because you deal with so many critical personnel matters. So with that, a person I would choose as sheriff or undersheriff would be somebody who I know can handle the complex personnel issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And they are complex, and you have to have a working relationship not only with the sheriff, but you also have to have a relationship with the personnel director and investigators, whether they be within your department or outside of your department, and you want them to have the same mission as you. So that's the type of person I would choose to be my undersheriff, and no, I haven't decided yet.
Thank you. Ms. Rainey. Leadership is extremely important in all aspects, but especially in a dynamic environment such as military or paramilitary organization. Who would you appoint as your undersheriff and why?
So I agree with Mr. Pritchard here. You need a strong leader in the undersheriff role. And what's unique about this election is you have 4 strong individuals sitting right there, and I respect all 4 of these individuals. So which one of you guys want to be my undersheriff? but seriously, I'm serious. I'm taking numbers.
I know the job.
Right. So I'm going to hire Eric, I guess. That's a difficult question to answer at this point in the race, for sure. Obviously, we have somebody in mind, and none of us is going to give up our hand. So I guess we'll see in June 7th. But just know and trust in each one of our decisions. Whoever wins this election, we will choose that person that's best suited for that position.
Thank you. Mr. Vedder, same question? Okay.
Yes, I have somebody in mind for undersheriff. No, I'm not going to reveal a name and put that person out of the public eye. The person I have in mind is a veteran officer who has a vast amount of experience, whether it be on the street or administratively, policy-wise. But what I've learned prior to going up to the police department in Mammoth Lakes, I was 16 years out as a deputy sheriff. And something that stood out is you've got your sheriff that's the politician and makes the final decision, but the number 2 in command, the undersheriff, is the one that runs day-to-day operations. That sheriff, a sheriff needs a strong individual who knows how to run a department day-to-day, who they can trust, who isn't just a yes man and is going to tell the sheriff anything they want to know. In the words of General George S. Patton, if everybody is thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking. And that's a true statement, especially in law enforcement. You need somebody who can step up and say, hey boss, I disagree with you. I think we should go this route, and get somebody to listen. So yes, I've got a very good qualified candidate in mind, and depending on where the June election goes, then we'll see if we let the rabbit out of the hat.
Thank you. Next question, we are going to start with Mr. Pritchard. Schools are extremely vulnerable and extremely vital in our communities. What are you doing, or would you do to keep our schools safe? Who would you be willing, would you be willing to implement a service resource officer? School resource officer.
Short answer, yes. So, the school resource officer is something that's almost like an extra duty. When you have full staffing, you can start to get into these specialized duties as far as being a school resource officer. What we faced over the years with the sheriff's office is staffing issues. When you don't have staffing out on patrol, you can't provide that extra support to local schools or task force such as INET or MINT, as it used to be called, or that's pretty well dissolved, but we're fighting for resources, and we're trying to do more with less, and we want to keep our schools safe. I have a son who's a freshman in high school, and I think about it every day with the internet, and actually he just told me the other day that kid threatened to shoot up the school the other day because he posted whatever the media platform was. And that's concerning because as a parent, you always wonder if it's that day that someone's going to show up to your child's school and do something terrible. We had SWAT training one day. One of my sergeants was there. We were actually having training, and the Bishop Police Department chased someone into the high school, and we got there as quickly as we could. I think these guys timed it to where we always had SED training because we were all there immediately. So it is important to have those resources there. And we're only down 2 positions right now. We just hired a brand new deputy. And once we get to full staff, I would love to revisit the school resource officer for our schools.
Thank you. Ms. Rennie.
Sure, can you repeat that, please?
Yes. Schools are extremely vulnerable and extremely vital in our communities. What are you doing, or what would you do to keep the schools safe? And would you be willing to implement a school resource officer?
Sure, absolutely. So I think it's really important to protect our youth, especially right now, like Mr. Pritchard said, in the world of technology. I know there's been some TikTok challenges where kids are doing awful things in the school and to each other. I know that the Bishop Police Department currently has a school resource officer, Officer Brady P., who's doing an amazing job. Again, like Mr. Pritchard said, there's staffing and funding issues. But I think that we can allocate at least a part-time deputy, like I did when I was on patrol. I worked in the independent school and the Lone Pine School on a part-time basis. And it was basically teaching the kids social awareness, drug awareness. So I think it's really important. Our youth is our future, and they're the ones that we need to focus our attention on the most. They're the most vulnerable, they're the most impressionable. So I believe absolutely yes, we need to instate that program. Unfortunately, right now the budget's not there, but I'm certain that there's grant funding out there with the unserved and underserved community that we live in. We can instate that for sure. And I think Noonan would do a great job over there.
Mr. Redder, same question. Schools are extremely vulnerable and extremely vital in our communities. What are you doing or would you do to keep our schools safe? Would you be willing to implement a school resource officer?
110% on the school resource officer. One of my goals is to get at least one, if not two, school resource officers for Inyo County Sheriff's Department. Up at Mammoth Lakes, we have one school resource officer, which we just got a $400,000+ grant to pay for the salary for the next 3 years, which allows us to backfill for staffing, to replace him in the field. There are times with staffing, patrol is number one because you have to take care of the calls for service in the community, but there is nothing stopping deputies from going into schools regularly, whether they're a school resource officer or not, and bridge that gap with the youth. Like I said, that community-oriented policing model is crucial. I know I've never been a school resource officer. I had no desire to be a school resource officer. However, I went to schools regularly, whether it was for security checks or just to go out on the playground while the kids were at recess, pass out stickers, let them know that, hey, the police, the sheriffs are good people. I have two daughters, they're now 15 and 12. I used to go on my own time and I would go to their schools and I would go in uniform, do their classes, and I would teach firearm safety, stranger danger, and 911 use. And wonderful. And it just takes that, starting that young, for them to remember that good interaction they had with that law enforcement. So, yes, deputies, if funding's an issue, and you can't get a school resource officer right away, but it'll be something I'll continue to go after, especially because there is money there for grants. But I will have deputies in the schools regularly and making those deterring any kind of possible crime that could occur on that campus.
Thank you. Mr. Johnston, same question. Schools are extremely vulnerable and extremely vital in our communities. What are you doing or would you do to keep our schools safe? Would you be willing to implement a school resource officer?
Well, as far as the school resource officer, yes, I 100% agree with that. It's something that the schools need. We have schools in Lone Pine, Big Pine, Independence. I believe there's also a small school in Alancha. Getting officers to go to these schools to show the kids that we're not the bad guys. We're here to help them. We're here to educate them, ensure that they are, learning. A lot of times kids are exposed to us hauling off one of their parents, which is not good, but if we're there in the school as a resource officer, assisting them, helping them, training them. We could also have the DARE program, it used to be really big. That assisted, for a while I thought it just educated the kids on what drugs not to use, but I think it educated some on what drugs to use. But it is a good program. I'd like to see something like that come back along with the school resource officer, and they can work hand in hand. And like Mr. Vedder said, there are grants out there. There's several that we could get that could assist us in supplementing our deputies as they go for this type of work. It's just like I said, and plus I think there's stuff with the schools too that we could utilize. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, this will be the last of the preset questions. We'll start with Ms. Rennie. Public service is much more than just being on duty as a sheriff or a peace officer. How are you involved with your community? What have you done outside of your career which betters your community?
So I believe that we as law enforcement officers need to get out in the community more. Recently, I've been out attending community meetings and seeing what the community actually wants and needs from law enforcement. We need to listen to our constituents because we work for them. We're here for them. I feel that we need to attend more community meetings. I think that by volunteering our time and going, maybe even CASA, right, CASA, and getting in with our youth is really, really important. We need to show the community that we're there and we care. We need to set an example for them. I think that it's really important that we be more involved with our youth in the sports programs. I think that working in multidisciplinary teams and volunteering, I do a lot of work for Wild Hours, our Victim Advocacy Center. I recently just taught a class on my own time. It shows that we care and that we're not just people here looking to make a dollar. We're doing this job for people, to protect people, and to shield people from the awful things that happen in this world. And I think that's really important. And to be out there and to be visible and to be transparent is what we all need to do. We all need to work together for a common goal. And I believe that I have been doing that personally. I see these guys out in the public too. And I think that's really important. And it shows a dedication and it earns trust within the community.
Thank you. Mr. Bennett? Public service is much more than just being on duty as a sheriff or peace officer. How are you involved with your community? What have you done outside of your career which betters your community?
You know, peace officers are held to a higher standard both on and off duty, and I have always taken pride in being a peace officer, whether it's in my personal life or my on-duty life. I have personally, you know, my wife, Lisa Vetter, who works for Inyo County Probation, she's been involved with AYSO for several years, both as a coach and as an administrator. At times when she couldn't coach, guess who filled in? Dad. So I was on those sidelines, you know, teaching those kids how to play soccer and whatnot. I love being out in the community. I've gone to, you know, domestic violence awareness programs that have gone on with my wife. It's good to be visible. You know, most cops don't like to be recognized when they're off duty. We try to not be out in the open because, you know, anywhere we go in uniform, everyone recognizes us. So when somebody comes up to me and says, "Oh, I didn't recognize you," I'm thinking, good, I'm glad you didn't, because I didn't want to be recognized. But the fact that when we are out in a small community like this, more so than not, we are recognized. People do put a face to the name and the job. I don't mind that at all. I love being out in the community. I love being around people. I'm a people person. Always have been. If I wasn't, I wouldn't be in this job because we serve the people in this job. So just, you know, kind of elaborating on what Ms. Rennie said, it's important for us to be out in the community and be highly visible on and off duty and just participate and let people know we care and that it goes beyond our jobs.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson. Public service is more than just being on duty as a sheriff or peace officer. How are you involved with your community? What have you done outside of your career which betters your community?
Well, as far as volunteers and stuff like that, I've worked a lot with the meal days. I don't know if anyone ever drove by me and saw me out there, detours. I've done that for the last, I think, 6 years now. This year, well, we missed 2 years because of COVID. I think being in the public eye and showing them that they're a different side of us, you know, we're also human. And although there's times when we're in the middle of stuff and we're dealing with, you know, some bad things going on, but seeing us out there in the public, you know, doing like meal days, the deer dinners, the waterfowl dinners, all that, helping kids with sports. All my children are growing, so I haven't really got into the sports yet, and my 2 grandchildren, they are about 5 hours away, so I go and watch them play sports, but I haven't really done the sports thing for probably about 20 years. But it's something that I've looked at, and I mean, I've gotten into, been with the community, you know, getting out there. A lot of people ride horses, I've been out with them on horseback and stuff like that. But mainly just getting out there so people know that we are human and that we think the same way as you do. It's just we have a different job than most people do, and we have to deal with things that most people don't want to deal with. And that's what we're here to do. And I think as just going out working, and as a dad, I love going out working with children and doing anything I can to better our communities. Thank you.
Mr. Pritchard. Public service is much more than just being on duty as a sheriff or peace officer. How are you involved with your community? What have you done outside of your career which betters your community?
I've got a high school coaching application sitting in my kitchen right now, so we'll see. I don't know if my wife will appreciate that, if we're not busy enough these days. So my involvement with the community has been really through youth sports. My daughter is now a freshman in college, and I started coaching soccer when she was 5 years old. I got duped into coaching. He says, Greg Alexander told me, your daughter's team doesn't have a coach, so would you be willing to do it? So he tricked me. He says, I love getting the football players to coach soccer. So I've been coaching my kids, or I would coach my daughter, and then that first year, and then she went on to play U8, U10, and one day we were sitting on the sidelines, and my daughter's team was getting crushed, and I don't think they won a game all season. And just the look in her eyes was awful. It was heartbreaking as a parent. And my wife said, well, if you're not coaching, you can't complain. So I became a coach again. And so I coached my daughter through U10, U12, and then continued on with my son coaching. And I also refereed, so they needed referees. And Joe knows, because of Lisa, there's not enough volunteers out there. And it's amazing. Everybody wants these programs for their children. But so I refed also. So I would go there with my coach's bag, coach a game, and then ref 3 games. I think one year I probably refed about every game in U12. But I did that, and then one year there weren't enough coaches to take both teams to Kit Carson. So I took both boys' teams and coached both of them so that the other team could go. But as far as other engagement with the community, during COVID, my daughter didn't get her senior year, which was heartbreaking. And I went to the school and I volunteered my time so that the seniors could paint their senior parking lots because they weren't getting anything out of the schools. So I figured if they weren't going to do it, I was going to do it. So I sat there over the weekend and got to see my daughter paint her parking spot. So also, sorry about that. It's my daughter's senior year. So, and then my wife spearheaded the pop-up prom, and that was probably the best part of her senior year. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, we are going to take a brief 5-minute break, and we will come back in and have questions for the candidates from the public. There is a bar back in the back, just in case. And we encourage you to please go back in the back and fill out questions if you have anything.
This thing is, well, I needed a day off.
It's been cutting in and out because of the internet in the place is slow. So I switched to my hotspot. Now it's doing it, and then, but because it switched out, I'm like, well, let's record the second half so we can at least put it on. We're still live, by the way. This is Jesse Steele from Eastern Sierra Now, and that was the first half of the Sheriff's Candidate Town Hall at the VFW. We are taking a little break here. We're going to leave the live stream running because, as some of you noticed, the internet did get a little slow and iffy during the middle and cut it in and out, so I don't want to take the chance of shutting it off. So, please stay tuned. And for all of you at home, we will stay here to get the second half, which is questions from the community. What's going on, guys? What's going on? See ya. And if you guys didn't hear, I'm going to try to keep my voice down because I know it's pretty loud in here. They are taking 5 minutes right now, and then they will regroup and ask the community questions. We'll stay here with you on Eastern Sierra now. You know what, it takes a lot to pull something like this off. It's been about a stressful couple of days, I'll tell you that. If you're interested in helping support local news, it would get us better equipment, better stuff for live streaming events like this for the community, then please head over to patreon.com/Eastern Sierra Now. And there's many attractive tiers where you can just donate 5, 10, 20 bucks. That's going to go towards helping make sure we can get these, I think, a really expensive gear that it takes. So if you're interested in that, please do that or reach out at info@easternsierranow.com. We'll be back in just a moment.
Yeah, so the reason why we had cycling is it was an engine. Yeah, so like we obviously like
it's taking the video from you and it's taking the audio from me. So every time I type, it's really loud because it's like the microphone in here. Or if like when I told you to hit record, Johnny's all, it sounds like you're yelling to Ella. And I'm like, oh, I was whispering. So I'm like, oh crap. So this is like what we got to figure out is how to make this all work really smooth for the future for this kind of crap. This is
What's happening, man?
Hey, what's going on, man?
How are you?
Good.
How is the new project coming along?
Pretty good.
Nice.
1 second.
Say hello to the
Testing. Can you hear it?
Okay, we're going to start with the public questions from the box. Keep in mind, there are quite a few. We will try to get to as many as we can. Again, everyone, we're taking these in no specific order. Candidates will have 2 minutes to answer. We'll start with Ms. Rainey. It says, candidates mentioned a lack of community trust and doing more community-oriented policing. How do you think trust has been lost, and what will the community-oriented approach look like?
So after globally, the last few years, if you've watched the news or looked at social media, there's been a lot of stigma, negative stigma surrounding law enforcement. And I think that in order to get to become part of that community, we need to attend community meetings. We need to, the community-oriented policing that we've been talking about is to kind of bring the public into law enforcement. I think that can be achieved by instating, you know, expanding our reserve program. We can have the public come in and see what we do. Also do a community-oriented policing program where we can bring citizens in to do part of the work that we do on a daily basis with volunteers. Again, like I just said, community meetings are huge, so we can listen to the needs and the concerns of the citizens of the county and try to address those needs to better serve them, to build trust, to get out more often, to walk the streets when we're patrolled, to talk to business owners, to talk to people, and see how they're doing, get to know them. I think that we in law enforcement, we that are playing in the street, I think that we need to stop and talk to the kids when they're playing basketball in the street, when they're riding skateboards. I think that's super important. Talk to the people in the park, just walk around, introduce ourselves, let them know that we're human and that we care about them and see what they want from us as law enforcement, I think that's a good start to build those bridges and to let them know we care.
Thank you. Better? Candidates mentioned a lack of community trust and doing more community-oriented policing. How do you think trust has been lost, and what will the community-oriented approach look like?
Yeah, trust has been lost over the last at least decade, but especially since, the big high-profile use of forces, Ferguson and whatnot. People have lost that connection with police officers, and they look at us quite often as robots. They don't realize we have families and daughters and sons, and we go home and we play sports and we watch TV and we have birthday parties. Getting out of the patrol car is huge for community-oriented policing. Not just zipping up and down the highway and no one knows the names of deputies or recognizes them. As I've been talking to the citizens during this campaign, reaching out, the biggest complaints are coming from the patrol side. And I asked them, do any of you know your deputies' names? Not many do, and that needs to change. Deputies need to go into businesses, they need to go into schools, they need to, as you're driving down in the neighborhood, stop and talk to people. People like to be waved at, people like when we smile. It just brings everyone together and it shows that human side. So that's what really bridges that gap. Again, like going for the youth early on. We need those school resource officers. Not only does that bridge a gap with the youth, but it also bridges a gap with the parents and the problems they're having with the kids at this time. That's incredible. We have a great law enforcement explorer program for young men and women in high school age that have an interest in law enforcement. I want to see an explorer program with the Inyo County Sheriff's Department and the Bishop Police Department. We have a joint one with Mono County Sheriff, and it's phenomenal. watching what those young men and women can do and just the bright futures they have. So what it will look like, it'll look good because the community will really appreciate the direction and the culture change that I want to bring to the Inyo County Sheriff's Department.
Mr. Johnston, candidates mentioned a lack of community trust and doing more community-oriented policing. How do you think trust has been lost, and what will the community-oriented approach look like?
Well, as the rest of them have said here, the social media, the TV, defund the police, all this has been, brought out. And with the young people and people that hearing this on the news and everything, I believe that, we have lost the trust of the community and many others, that we need to set up programs where, when I was a cop in Montana, one of our things, we would walk the street and knock and check all the doors to make sure they were locked. And a lot of times people, if we have the manpower to do that, that's the thing, we need to have the manpower in order for us to have the programs that we want to have. Like the, reserve program would be nice to have, but we have to have the people to teach it. Ride-alongs would be great. I'd like to see more of those where the public can go out and ride with the deputies. That's how you're going to get to know them. But I believe going into the neighborhoods and actually getting out and walking the street, meeting the people and stuff like that. The Explorers program is an excellent program. Both of my older sons, they attended it down in Hemet, California. One thing I'd like to see is like a community day where we go to the park or at the fairgrounds and we set up stuff like a static display where we have the K-9 officer, the patrol car there, stuff like that, to show the public what we do, how we do it, and when we do it, and get them more involved. Thank you.
Mr. Pritchard. Candidates mentioned a lack of community trust and doing more community-oriented policing. How do you think trust has been lost, and what will the community-oriented approach look like?
So as far as the trust being lost, I think on a national level, that's been the narrative. If you turn on the TV, and I've tried to turn off the TV as much as possible these days, getting the news. All these events that you've seen, they're all captured on these devices, but they only capture a fraction of the context of what our officers are dealing with. And I think we're fortunate in that sense that at the local level, I don't think we've seen that loss of trust to that degree, or maybe even at all, because we've got the best men and women in law enforcement working for our office. And they are all community members. They know Cuddy, they know Noonan, the K-9 officer, they know Victor Lawson. They're all part of this community. And we're fortunate because everybody in this community sees them with their kids at a soccer game or a baseball game or a youth basketball game. And they're all involved in the community. And we don't get that, the people don't get that in a big city. And that's why we live here. We're really blessed to live in this community and have access to our law enforcement like we do. My kid, granted, I work for the sheriff's office, but he's not afraid to run up to Noonan's car and say, "Hey, it's me." And he goes, "Oh, who are you? I know who you are." But as far as the community policing, I've been working as sheriff to get locals hired, especially in the south end of the county, because we have lost those residents in the south end because of a lot of reasons, whether it be landlocked here in the valley and not having the availability of housing for our locals. But we have a couple people in the queue that are promising that are south end locals, and we need to get people who are invested in the community, especially in the south end. And that's really been my focus over the last few months, was getting those resources there. We have a sergeant that lives there now, and I've made it clear that I want my staff there at the Lone Pine substation, so the south end of the county feels like they're serviced and they feel like they have their own law enforcement officers that are vested in the community. And I agree, we need to walk the streets, we need to go to the businesses and introduce ourselves. I think Noonan, I think we're probably going to get scheduled for a K-9 exhibition in Lone Pine, but the kids love that stuff, so it's a community outreach, and it's showing them that we are human and we're normal people, and you know, that we can connect with everybody and service our community and just better be engaged with everybody in the valley.
Thank you. Mr. Vedder. Explain your position on issuing concealed weapons permits. Shall issue if the candidate passes background check and testing, only if candidates can show extreme need.
I currently conduct all the background, not the background, but the CCW interviews for Mammoth Lakes Police Department. I've been doing that for several years now. I am a firm believer in the Second Amendment. I believe that CCWs should be issued if somebody passes the background and goes through the proper training and can dictate a need for it. So I'm 100% in favor of CCW.
Mr. Johnson. Explain your position on issuing a concealed weapons permit. Shall issue if candidate passes background checks and testing. Only issue if candidate can show extreme need.
Well, as it was said, you know, I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment. If an individual comes, he passes the background, passes the testing, I don't see why they shouldn't be able to get one. As far as I know, there's no actual reason that you have to give for a CCW, but you need to be able to pass the firearms and the background in order to get that. And I issue any of them that passed all that.
Mr. Pritchard. Explain your proof. Whenever you're ready, sir. Explain your position on issuing concealed weapons permits. Shall issue if candidate passes background checks and testing. Only issue if candidate shows extreme need.
So my position is that our sheriff's office, we issue CCWs, and we're extremely, I wouldn't say lenient, but we do our due diligence. But as long as they pass the background process and meet all the criteria, we issue the CCW. There are instances where somebody comes in from another county and tried to claim that they live in our county because they have a P.O. box, or they can show us some sort of record of a bill. In those instances, if they're not being honest with us and we don't issue it, they can go back to the county in which they reside. But if they're residents of here and they pass a background check, we issue the CCW.
Ms. Rennie?
I think we're all going to have the same answer here. We're law enforcement officers. We carry weapons. We believe in the Second Amendment right, and we live in the Owens Valley, and everybody here believes in the gun right. So I don't think that's an issue at all. Like Mr. Pritchard said, as long as they can pass a background and qualify successfully annually, I don't think that's an issue.
Where can't you carry a weapon if you have a CCW?
School zones?
So I don't have to, but
That's okay. That's good. Good question.
houses of worship? Can you carry them in houses of worship?
I would think that would depend on the House of Worship's policies themselves. I don't think there's a restriction.
Okay.
Again, we appreciate questions, but because we're limited on time, I'm going to try and stick to it. Thank you. Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
do you believe the Inyo Sheriff has the power to disregard federal agencies and laws if it protects the citizens of Inyo?
Well, as we've seen in the past, not only has California disregarded federal laws, as far as being here in the state of California as a sheriff, we could not have to enforce a certain federal law. And an example of that is marijuana is illegal by federal standards. And yet we have them growing it and we have them selling it right here in our own county. So yeah, we could. I would not allow, if it's to protect the citizens of this county, yes, I would definitely protect them.
Mr. Pritchard, do you believe the Inyo Sheriff has the power to disregard federal agencies and laws if it protects the citizens of Inyo?
So the sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer of the county, and the federal government can't even come in and serve a federal warrant without first approaching the sheriff and getting his authorization. We've had that instance happen before with a federal warrant in the south end of the county, and they defer to us on whether or not we allow them in. So we have that discretion. So ultimately, if it's to protect the citizens of this county, which is what our oath is, I believe we could ignore laws depending on what it is, obviously, because it's a blanket statement. But we are the chief law enforcement of the county, and we are the ultimate authority within our county.
Thank you. Ms. Rennie, do you believe the Inyo Sheriff has the power to disregard federal agencies and laws if it protects the citizens of Inyo?
Again, I think we're all going to have kind of the same blanket answer with both Mr. Pritchard and Mr. Johnston. What we have in law enforcement, we call the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. In order to protect the citizens, we can work in the spirit of the law instead of following that to a T federally. So, yeah, we're going to all have the same, we'll see a lot, Mr. Better, though. He might have something better.
And Mr. Better.
100%.
You're gonna get booed.
The sheriff of all 58 counties, as well as the sheriffs of every county in the United States, has that authority and power to protect the constitutional rights of every citizen in that county. And that's of the utmost importance. I mentioned that earlier in the night, that the sheriff's primary job is to protect and defend and uphold the Constitution of the United States. And if that is the federal government coming in law enforcement wise and trying to infringe upon those rights, absolutely.
Mr. Pritchard, how will you relate to the business community? Please be specific. You always get the phone.
That's a broad question. How will I relate to them? In what capacity, in what sense? I don't understand the context. Well, my wife is a business owner. My wife's family are business owners. They're all entrepreneurs. My brother-in-law owns Reagan's. We go into these businesses, and when we visit them as law enforcement, I think we probably maybe visit Reagan's more than most. But I think we relate to the business owners on a community level. We're available to them. They voice their concerns to us. When there's crime, I have, Reagan call me and say, I have video. I say, call the PD. But they're always looking for answers, especially, business owners, whether it be, parking issues or theft issues or anything like that. They do reach out to us as a resource when they have questions like that. So that's how we relate to the business sector. We go in and we go in and we get the services from them. They provide services to us. So I think it's relatable because we're all in this community together. So I think that would be my answer. Thank you.
Ms. Rennie, how will you relate to the business community? Please be specific.
Well, I think how I've been, and actually Mr. Pritchard as well, we've been attending Inyo associate meetings, so we get to meet the business owners, we get to listen to their news and their concerns and address those as they do so. By patronizing the business owners, patronizing, not patronizing. We can patronize too if you like, but, you know, and utilizing their businesses for personal use. My husband was a business owner himself, just like Ms. Pritchard, so we understand that we need better relations with our local and small businesses and to support them appropriately.
Thank you. Mr. Beck?
Small businesses here in our community are the lifeblood of our economy. And without those businesses, we don't have an economy here. We rely on mainly tourists coming up, from down south throughout the year and whatnot. But people love those small businesses, the bakeries and the kitchen shops and the different places people, I hear tourists talk about them all the time. Where's a good place to go? Well, part of that community-oriented policing model, once again, I refer people all the time to local businesses, all the time, whether it's in Mammoth, Bishop, it doesn't matter. I mean, when we had an emergency with these huge storms back in December, I got somebody a room, the last room in the entire valley for an elderly couple that got stranded in those massive snowstorms we had in Bishop in Lone Pine. So it doesn't matter where in the valley, they are crucial for us. It's important that we have solid relations with them and be there for them. Like Mr. Pritchard was saying, if there's any issues whatsoever, we can address them directly, and they should feel they can come to us and we can resolve those problems that they're having.
Thank you. Mr. Johnston? How will you relate to the business community? Please be specific.
Well, as each of us have said up here, we're here to ensure that the businesses survive. And by figuring out what their needs are and figuring out what will assist them in doing a better job, I think that's what we're here to do. And helping them, like Mr. Pritchard said, parking or employee issues, something like that. If we can assist them in any way, then we will. And that is, whatever we need to do to improve their businesses to bring it back to what it was at one time. Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Rennie? It's a two-part. How many years of patrol experience do you have specifically assigned to patrol? Of those years on patrol, how many years as field supervisor?
I worked patrol from 2006 to 2010. And what was the second part?
Of those years on patrol, how many years as a field supervisor?
So when I worked patrol, we didn't necessarily have any supervisor other than the sergeant on patrol. I was not a sergeant with the sheriff's department, but what we called like an officer in charge. Of those 4 years, probably 3 years of that on patrol, I performed the task of the supervisors when there was a void in supervision, excuse me. So, yeah.
Mr. Beck? How many years of patrol experience do you have specifically assigned to patrol? Of those years on patrol, how many as a field supervisor?
Just quickly adding some numbers up off the top of my head here, being about 16 years out of my 23 on patrol. And out of those 23 years, I have done 9, both as a corporal, at the time I was with Inyo County Sheriff, and then approximately it'll be in June, 6 years as a field sergeant. Something that's my dad spent 37 years with LA County Sheriff and worked his way up through the ranks. When he retired, after 37 years, his badge number was 14, and that's not too shabby out of 14,500 deputies. Something he always passed on, he always told me, out of all the ranks, the most important job is field sergeant. He said a field sergeant is not only a cop still and out there in the field taking care of the troops, but a field sergeant is also the administrator. They are that linchpin that keeps the entire machine oiled and running well. And that's very true. I have definitely, being a sergeant up in Mammoth Lakes has been a wonderful learning experience, and what a great job it's been. I love being a field sergeant. So it's a crucial job. It lines you up for, if you decide to promote, it gives you all kinds of tools in the tool belt, and you don't forget where you came from when you've been a field sergeant.
Mr. Johnston, how many years of patrol experience do you have, specifically assigned to patrol? Of those years on patrol, how many years as a field supervisor?
Well, I've had at least 8 years, 4 in California, or here with Inyo County, and 4 in Montana when I worked up there. 2 of the years here in being on at the residential post in Copa, I was on by myself most of the time. So I haven't been a field supervisor, but I've been a deputy, like I said, for at least 8 years on patrol.
Thank you. Mr. Pritchard, how many years on patrol experience do you have, specifically assigned to patrol? Of those years on patrol, how many years as a field supervisor?
I don't know if I can remember back that far.
You don't look that old.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So I promoted to corporal in 2008. I graduated the academy in 2001. I did some time in custody, approximately 2 to 3 years. So I'm right around 5 years of patrol time, both south and north end of the county. So that patrol time was a great experience, because in the south end of the county, you're kind of on your own. You don't have the luxury of a night shift with the PD or CHP. You have to make decisions. You have to use a lot of discretion when you get into something, whether it be a car stop full of people at 2 o'clock in the morning, and decide to just let it go that night because you're the only one working. And then I transferred up to Bishop, which was a great learning experience, because it was a lot more active up in the Bishop area. North end of the county was great, but you were mostly handling calls for service, as opposed to Lone Pine, south end of the county, where you could be a little bit more proactive. So I got the best of both worlds, got to be proactive, and then went and handled calls to calls to calls. As far as being a field supervisor, when I promoted to corporal, I stayed out in the field for 3 to 4 months and then transferred into custody. But as a supervisor, you never really lose that title of supervisor. So when you have a deputy calling you, or you have to leave the jail for a call for service, you're still the field supervisor if you're the only one on duty. So it really doesn't matter where you're assigned, you're always going to be a supervisor to that deputy that needs you, that needs advice. That was also true when I was a sergeant. And the other thing that kept me involved in operations was my 10 years of experience with the SED team, which was our multi-agency SWAT team. So those were the people who showed up when the field deputies, when the call was over their head and they needed more resources. And those 10 years were very valuable in my experience.
Better. Excuse me. When is it permissible for deputies to kick a subject in the head and body while they are unarmed and laying on the ground?
That's what we call a baited question.
I didn't write it.
Is it permissible to kick a suspect while they're down, just as is? Absolutely not. It's against the law. It's a violation of civil rights. We are trained on that. I was trained on that 24 years ago in the police academy, and we train on that currently. It comes under regular use of force training. So no, it isn't. It is not permissible. Do we get into physical altercations on the job? Absolutely. Do we try to avoid those physical altercations? 100%. You know, you hear the word de-escalation now. De-escalation training is actually mandated by California Post, which is Peace Officer Standards and Training. So every 2 years, every peace officer in the state of California is required to do a minimum set hours in 5 areas, and that's driving, tactical firearms, use of force, which includes de-escalation, as well as what they changed. It used to be tactical communication, now it's strategic communication, and again, they added de-escalation into that, as well as defensive tactics. Defensive tactics specifically how we, engage physically with a suspect. We want to use the most minimal amount of force if something does go physical to effect an arrest. There is not one officer or deputy that I've ever known, including myself, that goes out on a shift hoping to get into a physical fight, hoping to get into a shooting. We want to go home at night. We want to go see our families. I want to go home to my wife and my 2 daughters. So, no, it is not permissible just to kick an unarmed suspect on the ground in the head or stomach or whatever the specific question was.
Thank you. Mr. Johnston, same question. When is it permissible for deputies to kick a subject in the head and body while they are unarmed and laying on the ground?
It's never, is the only answer I come up with. That's something that is not tolerated. As it was said, it's a violation of the law. It shouldn't happen. There's no reason that somebody that's laying on the ground should be kicked in the head or brutalized in such a way. And if it ever happens, then we will, appropriate action will be taken, and I can assure you that. I mean, there's plenty of training out there where we don't need to do that stuff. As it was mentioned, de-escalation training, it's something that we need here, and I believe we have it. I think we need to just, improve on a lot of the training that we have here. Simply because it takes us forever to go somewhere to go to training. And it's all out of the area. We can get our people trained and bring them here, and it's called train the trainer. We can get better training, and it's going to help the deputies down the road.
Thank you. Mr. Pritchard, when is it permissible for deputies to kick a subject in the head and body while they are unarmed and laying on the ground?
I'll just keep this answer short. It's not.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Rennie, any question?
It's never acceptable at all. My office conducts use of force investigations regarding officer use of force. And it's never acceptable. Absolutely not. Ever.
Thank you. Mr. John, if elected sheriff, will the department cooperate with ICE?
Well, once again, that's a federal agency, and I think it would have to be looked at as a big no, just because, we have people here that are in the process of probably trying to become legal citizens, and as far as I know, the sheriff's department is not allowed any of that to go on with ICE or anything like that.
Mr. Pritchard.
Repeat the question.
If elected sheriff, will the department cooperate with ICE?
So our office does cooperate with ICE to a certain extent. Because when we have someone who is a violent felon who is in our custody, and we know that release date, and that release date is public information, and the fact that they're in custody is public information, they know when that person is being released from our custody. Do we actively go out and seek out, people for immigration violations? No, we've never done that. That's not our role. That's the federal government's role, not our role. It's been a long time since we've assisted ICE in anything, but absolutely, if there is a violent predator, violent criminal in our custody, and they have a detainer on them, we do notify ICE through the legal channels that are available to us, and they do get released to ICE from our custody. So we release them, they're free, and if ICE just happens to be outside the front door, so be it.
Ms. Rennie, elected sheriff, will the department cooperate with ICE?
So I think Mr. Pritchard stole all my answers. In my career in law enforcement, we have not done any type of immigration and custom enforcement stings, if this is what the question is pertaining to, in a very long time. I think that's kind of gone to the wayside. Again, I think the only time that we should cooperate with ICE is to apprehend a violent felon, or in the instance that Mr. Pritchard was referring to not release the violent felon out into the public without contacting ICE.
Mr. Beck, elected sheriff, will the department cooperate with ICE?
So in nearly 24 years of my career, I have never been able to arrest somebody for an immigration violation. Law enforcement in California is not permitted to. As for cooperating with ICE, there's a time and a place, and I agree with my counterparts here that you've got violent felons, you've got pedophiles, sexual predators, absolutely. They don't belong here. They are preying upon our citizens. They are infringing on your rights and, turning our citizens into victims. So as far as if they're getting released, absolutely. If they're a violent felon, sexual predator or whatnot, gang member, absolutely.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question. This will be the last question of the night. Start with Mr. Pritchard. What do you see as your most important role as sheriff?
My important role.
Just grab the mic. So, the most important role of a sheriff is to be a servant to the community and a leader in the community and a leader for the people within the department. And that's what I see as the role of sheriff. A community member, a community leader, somebody that the people that work under me can look up to, someone that they can come into my office and speak to when they have concerns, issues, problems. And not only that, someone who's going to lift these guys up, someone who's going to make sure they succeed. And that's what I've done throughout my career, is lift these guys up, give them all the resources that we can give them. My sole focus as sheriff is to make sure that they're successful, that our department is successful, because when we succeed, everybody succeeds. And that's my sole focus. All the decisions I make are for the people that I work with and for the community.
Thank you. Ms. Rennie, what do you see as your most important role as sheriff?
I believe the most important role as sheriff is to provide guidance to the patrol officers and make sure they're maintaining the peace, to be a role model to the citizens of the Inyo County, and to make sure that everybody's, sorry, I get a little tired here. Just to make sure that we provide these services that the community needs, to make sure that the streets are safe and that our kids are safe, and to ensure that everybody's happy. Sorry, I'm getting a little tired here. But I agree with Mr. Pritchard again. No, but seriously, we need to be an upstanding leader. We need to make sure we take care of our staff, our guys, our community.
Mr. Vander, what do you see as your most important role as sheriff?
I've stated this before, and I'll state it again. The most important role of the sheriff is to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. Because without that precious document, we don't have any freedoms. Throughout history, the world, whether it's communism, dictatorships, fascism, it doesn't matter. They've been after what we've got, what veterans in this room have fought and died for, what my dad fought for in Korea and whatnot. So it is crucial for the sheriff of every county to uphold and defend the United States Constitution.
Mr. Johnson? Johnston? I'm trying to ruin your spelling of your name. What do you see as your most important role as sheriff?
Well, going back to my military, I believe, you lead by, leadership is, you lead by example. And ensuring that all your people are aware of what's going on, what you're doing, and how things are supposed to be done. You lead by example with integrity and professionalism, and ensure that your people are doing the same. Keep the community involved with everything that you do, and I think we'll have a better community. Thank you.
At this time, that is the end of the questions. Sergeant Vetter, we'll start with you with your closing statements. Floor is yours, sir.
Well, it would be a great honor to be elected as the next sheriff of Inyo County. Spent the last 23, almost 24 years dedicated to public service. It runs in my family, my father, my uncle, my cousin. It's been a long tradition, and I wear my badge with pride. I've never trampled on people's rights. I've upheld the Constitution, as my oath stated. I'm a people person. I like people. That's why I got into this job. I like helping people. If elected sheriff of Inyo County, it's my promise to you that I will serve with absolute dedication and strong leadership and ethical leadership. And that's what we need. So much government now, those morals, values, and ethics have been lost. And I can stand tall and say, I've never lost that. And I will continue that to the day I die. And that's a promise to you. I plan to make a great culture change at the Inyo County Sheriff's Department. It's been stagnant for a long time. I want to bring back that community-oriented policing, like I spoke of. It's crucial. I want to reach out to the youth and get them involved. And I'm proud to serve with the three people sitting up here with me. But you will see a definite change, and you will see a place where people want to work and where they want to live, and it will be a good overall culture change for this department.
Ms. Reynolds, floor is yours.
So I have 19 years of law enforcement experience. I know we hit on patrol time, and I know I had the least amount of patrol time with 4 years. But that's because I moved up through the ranks really quickly, and I worked every facet of law enforcement that there is. I've worked patrol, I've worked corrections, I've worked drug suppression, I worked on our SART team, I worked in collaboration with our partner agencies, with the Bishop Police Department, CHP, Health and Human Services, all to ensure that the needs of the community are met. If I'm elected sheriff, I will instate a transitional leadership style, which will aim to inspire and innovate our deputies and bring in our community. I'll expand our reserve program that will lessen our calls for, or our time for service, or calls for service, we're getting time. And to make sure that our community is safer, I want to bring the community back together and into law enforcement. And I like to see these changes because I love this community that I grew up in and this community that I live in. And I care about the people and I care about the law enforcement officers. I want to make sure they're safe and I want everybody happy. And I think I can do that with my training, my experience, and my desire.
Sheriff Pritchard, floor is yours.
Oh, that's right, we're doing the reverse, yeah.
So, I'm currently the sheriff, and I don't take that position lightly. I'm the only one up here that won't have a job post-election. But that's how seriously I take it. That's my commitment to this position, to this community, and to the men and women who I serve alongside. Because they are my family. I've hired most of them, or had a part in hiring them. I've had a part in their success. I've watched them build their families, build their careers. I've lifted them off the ground when they're down, and I've built them back up. My job is to see them succeed. And everything I do and every decision I've made as sheriff from the time I was appointed up until now has been that laser focus. I grew up here. My wife was born and raised here, and I raised my family here. I'm fully invested in this community, and I'm fully invested in this department. I've spent my entire career with the Inyo County Sheriff's Office, and it means everything to me. And that's why I've committed myself to running for office, because I didn't do this just because the top spot was open. I do it because it means that much to me, and the men and women of this department mean that much to me, and this community means that much to me.
Thank you. Mr. Johnston?
The reason I'm running for sheriff, I believe that I can make changes within the department, bring communities together, and bring the path, the department back to where it was years ago. The way everybody worked together, it was a family with the community and everything. I know things have changed here with, defunding the police, all that, but we can get through that. And I believe by working with the officers and deputies and surrounding agencies, we can bring a better relationship for the community. And that's why I'm running for sheriff. Thank you.
Gentlemen, lady, we would like to thank you on behalf of VFW 8988. This was a unanimous decision from our Corps of Officers, Commander John Underhill, Senior Vice Commander Bart Williamson, Junior Vice Commander Derek Banta, and our Quartermaster, Josh Nicholson. It was a unanimous decision to host this. We appreciate you being here. The public, thank you for showing. Thank you. This is what makes everything work the way it does, and we appreciate it. Thanks very much.